You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look up better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Deku Meets Teen Wolf. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of D3 Miles art on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Despite it being 9 o'clock at night and with tomorrow being the first day of fall semester of Izukumidoriya's last year in middle school starting the next day, he couldn't fall asleep. He was in his room, listening to music, tossing a lacrosse ball into the air and catching. As he laid back on his bed, he thought about how tomorrow was going to go. With it being the first day back to school, it was going to be a day filled with meaningless checkups and mini-exams to see what was remembered over summer, or most likely what was forgotten. Worse, it meant he would have to deal with dodging Bakugo and his relentless bullying. Izuku sighed as he just needed to survive one more semester of Bakugo's constant terror. Then he could go away to a normal high school and not have to deal with that. The only good thing was going to be lacrosse practice after school. This year was his last to try and make team captain of his neighborhood's junior division lacrosse team. Izuku tossed the lacrosse ball into the air, but it was hard and tried to reach out with his right arm but only managed to hit with his hand and send it flying into the wall. The lacrosse ball bounced off the wall, nearly knocking a picture off the wall, forcing Izuku to run over and catch the frame before it fell. As Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, he heard something creaking outside. Izuku paused the music and heard the same creaking noise. His mother shouldn't have been home as her job as a nurse at the local hospital had her working the night shift. She shouldn't be home until 6, so that left the guess of who was breaking into the house. Izuku quickly kicked the lacrosse ball under this bed and crept out into the hallway. As he neared the stairs, Izuku reached down and grabbed the baseball bat that was leaning against a small table with a vase flower on table. Inko had bought it for home defense when she first started the night shift and wanted Izuku to have something to be able to defend himself with. Izuku slowly crept down the stairs and took a look in the living room. He didn't see anyone, so he headed out the front door and looked around on the porch. Despite it being a half moon, it was shining bright enough that the street lamps weren't needed. He looked up and down the street, but didn't see anyone. He walked up to the porch railing and heard the roof above him creak. He raised his bat ready to attack, when suddenly someone swung down in front of him. He screamed, causing the person hanging upside down in front of him from the roof to scream too. Izuku backed up and then saw who was hanging in front of him. "Kei, what the hell are you doing here? I nearly attacked you with my bat," Izuku said, as he lowered the bat. "You weren't answering your phone, so I came over to see what was wrong." Kei paused as he looked at the bat Izuku was holding onto. "Why do you have a bat? You don't play baseball." "I thought you were a predator trying to break in," Izuku said, as he reached into his jacket's pocket and pulled out his inhaler. Not only was he quirkless, he also had asthma. He took a breath from it, to help slow his heart rate down. "A predator, really? You think so lowly of me? No offense buddy, but you understand better than most what kind of world we live in, so what is a bat going to do?" "Alright, just forget about that. Look, I know it's late but you gotta hear this. I saw my dad leave 20 minutes ago after dispatch called in. They're bringing every officer in the Musufata department," Kei said, as he didn't move to bring himself to the ground. "For what? There wasn't any villain attack on the news," Izuku said. "Two joggers called it in a 10-54D. You know what that means," Kei said, as a smile appeared on his face, not helped by the fact his face was starting to become beet red from all the blood rushing to his face. Izuku paused as he thought about the different police radio codes that Kei had memorized for no reason. The only one he could remember was a 10-29D potential hazard personal, and 10-58DS, potential villain personal. No, and what did you dad say about using your police scanner? He said that it's government work and I shouldn't be listening. But come on, 10-54D means a body, and get this, when my dad got the call he tore out of the driveway like it was World War III. Kei said. Really, a dead body? Izuku said, some interest appearing in his voice. It had been a while since a serial killer was running around. All Might had put a stop to more than just organized crime. No. A body of water. Yes, you idiot, a dead body, it was right off one of the hiking trails. Kei said, he swung a playful fist at Izuku. What's so special about that, and can you get down from there? I can see BLD rushing to your head. Izuku said. Kei smiled, then disappeared behind the roof, then he jumped down. He picked himself up and climbed onto the porch, leaning against the railing. Come on, a dead body found in the middle of the woods. Doesn't the sound be a little weird? Kei jumped over the railing with a smile. By dumped in the forest, you mean murdered? Izuku sighed. Izuku only had one friend because he was quirkless. Kei only had one friend because, well, he was Kei. Nobody knows yet. Just that it was a girl, probably in her 20s. Kei said, as he brushed his pants off. Hold on, if they found the body, then what are they looking for now? Izuku asked. That's the cool part, they only found half of the body. Other half is still out there somewhere in the woods. Oh yeah, we're going. Kei began to nod as he hopped back over the railing and ran over to his bike. Without thinking, Izuku slid the bat through his jacket and ran over to his bike. He raced after Kei, who didn't stop until they came to a park that was right outside the forest. They parked their bike at the pavilion and Kei led Izuku over to the hiking trails. Are we really doing this? School starts tomorrow, and with lacrosse practice afterwards, I would really like to get a good night's sleep. Izuku said. You ask that after you biked all the way here? Kei laughed and happily punched Izuku in the arm. Come on, is that all you care about? Good grades and lacrosse. Come on, live a little, you're always the one that talks about wanting an adventurous life when we were kids. Besides, when's the last time I let you down? Kei said, turning on his flashlight and pointing it at Izuku. Izuku looked at Kei. He and Kei had been friends since kindergarten, and Kei remained Izuku's friend even after Izuku didn't receive a quirk. And because of that, the only real excitement Izuku got was when he went along with Kei dumb outings such as this one. Besides, all we'll be doing is sitting on the bench for this season, and that's such a grueling task. Izuku groaned and said, I was actually able to make first line before summer started. Coach gave me a chance and said he was impressed. It's not team captain, but I'll at least be able to play. Hey, that's the spirit, and, izukumidoriya, always trying for the impossible. Now come, let's go exploring. Kei said. Turn back to the hiking trail. Fine, but I want to be back by midnight, we both need sleep for tomorrow. Izuku headed towards Kei. Yes, Kei said and raised his fist up to his chest in a small victory. I promise you won't regret this. Kei suddenly tossed over his shoulder. Izuku caught it and saw it was another flashlight. You knew I would come. Izuku said, as he turned on his flashlight and looked around. Despite his quirk not having anything to do with mental or physic ability, Kei was always able to predict the choices or people around him. No, I was counting on it. Come on, the scanner said. The trail went cold in the forest. Kei turned to the hiking trail and began walking into the forest. Izuku sighed and quickly hurried after Kei. They walked down a dirt path, moving their flashlight back and forth, and tried to spot a dead body. Just out of curiosity, what half are we supposed to be looking for? Izuku asked. If he knew what he should be looking for, then maybe it would be easier to spot. Didn't think about that. Her description was 20 years old with average height, average build, based on the half the police found. Kei said, as he jumped over an above-ground route and dropped down a small hill. And what if whoever killed her is still running around in these woods? Izuku jumped over the root and looked up and saw Kei had disappeared. Kei, where did you go? Suddenly Kei was right in front of him, shining his flashlight in Izuku's eye. I didn't think about that either. Kei said. Will you stop shining that light in my eyes? Izuku said, as he grabbed Kei's hand and pulled the light out of his eyes, and it's comforting to know that you have everything planned out. With your usual attention to detail. I know, my mind can work such wonders. Kei said as he began to suddenly climb up the hill. Izuku noticed and climbed after him. At the top Kei jumped to the floor and turned off his flashlight. Izuku followed his example. Izuku looked around and saw another flashlight and heard dogs barking. What are we going to do, if we run into your father? Same plan for the killer. You run in one direction and I run in the opposite direction, and bad luck to whoever is caught. Come on. Kei said, as he suddenly stood up and took off running, almost tripping over a fallen branch. Wait, Kei. Izuku said, as he took a hit of his inhaler, then got up and took after his only friend. Wait up, Kei. As Izuku took after Kei, he noticed Kei was working his way around the police line, in an attempt to explore behind them. Kei stopped behind a tree and looked back at Izuku. Come on. Kei walked around the tree and came face to face with a K-9 unit. Oh wait. Kei stumbled backwards and fell to the ground. Hold it right there. An officer yelled as he shined his flashlight in Kei's eyes. Izuku was back a few yards and hid behind his own tree. Hang on. A voice called out that Izuku voice. Kei did say bad luck to whoever was caught, and Kei had just been caught by his father, Chief Keitaro. This little delinquent belongs to me. Dad, how are you doing? Kei said, as he crawled away from the dog and caught his breath. Kei, what are you doing out here in the woods? Chief Keitaro suspected he already knew the answer and the lie he would get. I wanted to go out for a late-night jog. Clear my mind for tomorrow, you know. Big day tomorrow, Kei said as he stood up. You've been listening to the police scanner again. Chief Keitaro said, and when Kei didn't answer, he continued, so do you listen to all of my phone calls? Kei huffed and said, no, not all of them. At least not the boring ones. Now, where's your usual partner in crime? You're not stupid enough to be here by yourself, you have some self-preservation instinct, Chief Keitaro said, as he swung his flashlight back and forth. Well, I'm glad you think so highly of myself, but who? Midoriya. He's back. It said he wanted to get a good night's sleep for the first day back at school tomorrow. And something about practice and making first line. Kei said, catching his breath. As it began to rain and some thunder roared in the distance. Chief Keitaro didn't look convinced. Midoriya. Izuku, Midoriya, you out there. He knew Kei would go to Izuku's home and do anything to convince him to come out. And Izuku was too selfish to let his friends go out into the woods alone with a killer on the loose. Midoriya. Alright, I guess Kei has to take your half of the punishment too. Chief Keitaro then walked forwards and grabbed his son's shoulder. I'm going to drive you home and then we're going to have a long conversation about something called invasion of privacy. As they walked away, Izuku began to hit the back of his head against the tree he was hiding behind. He should have walked out and took his punishment, but he didn't. Thunder crashed in the distance and Chief Keitaro called out, alright, let's wrap it up, we're not going to find anything in this storm. We'll have to wait until it passes. Izuku sighed and began walking back to where his bike was. He needed to get home and get to bed, or he wouldn't have the energy for school. As Izuku got back to the trail, he suddenly heard the flagging of bird wings and lightning split the sky. With the thunder it sounded like the electrical surge had hit only a few meters away. Izuku's ears started to ring. Once they stopped, Izuku began walking away, when he suddenly heard a wolf howl. Izuku froze and looked around. It should have been impossible for a wolf to howl, as it had been over 100 since the Japanese wolf went extinct. Izuku turned his flashlight back on and used it to look around. He froze on a large black figure. It froze as the light landed on it. Izuku couldn't see any of its features, except for its red glowing eyes. The figure blinked and it seemed to disappear, causing Izuku to frantically look around for the figure. As he looked around, his air became shallow, so he pulled out his inhaler and prepared it for another use. However, as he brought it up to his mouth, the black figure suddenly appeared and charged Izuku. It crashed into Izuku and pushed him to the ground. Izuku fell to the ground and his inhaler went flying out of his hand. Izuku struggled to breathe, so he quickly got up and turned on his flashlight and looked around for it. Izuku couldn't find it, but suddenly something came into the light of his flashlight. Izuku looked down and saw it was the missing girl, yet the police had found one half. Izuku looked down at the girl's waist and saw something that almost made him puke. The girl's intestines were slipping out onto the ground, where her body had been ripped in half. Izuku looked from the bloody body, then against his better judgment, opened one of his eyes. Maybe to confirm he was seeing what he thought he was seeing. Izuku caught a quick glimpse of the girl's body and his legs gave out. And he fell to the ground. Unfortunately he was on a hill and he began to roll down the hill. As he rolled, he screamed as got cuts over his arms and the bat fell out from his jacket. Izuku slowed down as he rolled into a root. He took a swallow breath as he got to his hands and knees. He looked around and saw the same red glowing eyes in the distance. Izuku clenched his teeth as he moved his hand to the side and it slid over his bat. He gripped his bat, just as the black figure came running at him. Izuku got to his feet and took a breath as deep as his asthma would let him. Izuku then swung his bat as hard as he could. It caught the black figure, then broke in half. Izuku could barely register this as the large black figure crashed into Izuku again. Izuku hit the ground and his vision went black as the figure covered his body. Izuku tried to move, but stopped when he felt a hot piercing sensation in his side. It felt like hundreds of little knives were being rammed into his body. Izuku screamed out, then as quickly as the sensation began it stopped. Izuku nearly bit his tongue, as he tried to sit up. He crawled over to a tree and used it to sit up. Izuku struggled to breathe as he discarded his broken bat and reached down to his side. His injury was surprising, not bleeding badly, like he had barely been cut, but his entire side was on fire. Izuku managed to get to his feet, only to see the black figure standing a meter away. Fighting against the pain, Izuku took off running. He didn't care which direction, as long as it was away from whatever that giant black figure was. Izuku ran until his footsteps suddenly sounded different. He looked down and saw he was standing on a road, until his shadow appeared on the road. Izuku looked opposite of his shadow and saw a car coming straight at him. Like a deer in the headlights, Izuku froze at the sight of the headlight. The car blared its horns and in the last meter swerved to the right and shot past Izuku. Izuku took a few deep breaths, as the car disappeared down the road. Once Izuku got his breathing under control, he sighed and began walking down the road, in the directions he hoped would lead him home. Fortunately it was, and it led him back to the pavilion, where he was able to grab his bike and walk it home. As he walked, the burning sensation in his side slowly began to numb and he could walk without much pain. When he got home he stashed his bike next to the pouch and walked upstairs. In the bathroom Izuku looked off his shirt and jacket and looked at the injury on his side. It looked like a bite, the symmetry U-shape marks made that much clear, but it didn't look human. All the puncture had been made with pointed ends, a human bite would have some kind of molar marks. Izuku sighed, maybe it was a criminal that had some kind of quirk that turned them into an animal. The pain was going numb, so the injury couldn't be that bad. Izuku would just have to wait until it healed. Grabbing some sticky gauze and a large bandage, Izuku peeled back the bandage and held it against his side with his right hand. Then using his left hand and his teeth, he cut strips of gauze tape, which he used to hold the bandage in place. When the bandage was in place, Izuku put away the gauze tape and walked to his room. After throwing his shirt and jacket in the trash, Izuku walked up to his bed, and fell on it. He fell asleep shortly after his head hit the pillow. The next morning Izuku woke up and the injury on his side reminded him that last night wasn't a dream. Not worrying about if his mom was awake, Izuku walked into the bathroom to change out the bandage. As he changed the bandage, he got a good look at the injury. It had started to heal, but it looked like it could still easily reopen if he wasn't careful. Izuku quickly changed out the bandages and walked back to his room and grabbed his phone. He pulled up Kei's phone number and hit dial. Kei almost picked immediately. "Hey Midoriya." "Hey Kei." Izuku said as he was confused about how Kei could sound so cheerful after the most likely hour lecture he got from his dad. Izuku could only assume Kei had snuck some coffee again. Izuku refocused on why he called Kei. "So Kei, were you able to get your bike back?" "Yeah, Dad sent an officer to pick it up this morning." "That was lucky, or they would have found your bike too." "I'm assuming they didn't find your bike, since I didn't hear my father call you Mom last night." Kei said. "Yeah, I got it home last night." "About last night, I found the other half of the body," Izuku said as he slipped out of his pair of pants and into a fresh one. "Where?" Kei screamed, making Izuku thankful he had switched to speaker and had his phone on the bed. "Actually not far from where we ran into your dad. I would have to go back to remember where I saw, but there's something more interesting. I think I ran into some kind of animal, it attacked me and bit me," Izuku said, as slipped into a shirt. Kei didn't respond for a bit. "Midoriya, are you just trying to make me feel bad for dragging you out last night?" "No, I actually have an injury on my side, I can show you at school." "Now where is my inhaler?" "CRP, I lost my inhaler in the woods last night," Izuku said, as he remembered how his inhaler went flying when he was tackled. "Well, my dad and his team have some stuff to do around the office and aren't able to resume the search until tonight. We should be able to get back in the woods after school and look for it," Kei said. "We've got lacrosse practice after school and it's on the other side of town," Izuku said, as he turned around and took a step. His foot landed on his lacrosse stick ball and he fell to the ground. He turned to land on his side, to save himself from a bloody nose, however he turned to land on his injured side. Izuku hit the ground and his body cried out in pain, making him yell. "Midoriya, are you okay?" Kei asked in a concerned voice. "I'm good. Tripped and landed on my side. I'm going to check my wound, then head out. I'll meet you out front." Izuku nearly bit his tongue as he ended the call and while grinding his teeth got to his knee. After slowly and carefully rolling up his shirt, Izuku peered back at the bandage and looked at his wound. He was expecting it to have reopened, but it hadn't. In fact, there was some black smoke coming out of the punctures. Izuku panicked a bit at that, but the smoke quickly disappeared. Izuku waited for his heart to stop, his eyes to melt, his brain to explode. Okay, maybe he was spending too much time with Kei late at night. Izuku took a deep breath and the pain disappeared, similar to how it had last night. Izuku waited for a few open seconds, but everything felt fine. He would just need to go see a doctor about the wound and the smoke. Maybe the local veterinarian would be able to identify what animal created the bite. Izuku redid the bandage and dropped his shirt. He then put a hand on his bed and picked himself up. After slipping his phone into his pocket, he grabbed his pre-made backpack and headed downstairs, making sure to be quiet as he hurried past his mother's room. Once downstairs he walked over to the kitchen and found breakfast waiting for him, along with a note leaning up against a glass of water. "Good morning, Izuku. Sorry I won't be awake to send you off back to school, we haven't had much time to be together still. I started the night shift. So I figured I would make you breakfast worthy of a pro hero. Good luck on your first day back." Izuku smiled as he looked down at the note then up at the breakfast. A full meal of okonomiyaki, causing Izuku to sigh. He loved his mother dearly, but she often worked herself to exhaustion. He wished she didn't. Then he noticed an extra sentence on the note. P.S. Lunch is in the refrigerator. Change exhaustion to death. Izuku knew he would need to make all this up to Inko eventually, but for now he was just happy to have just a loving and caring mother. Folding up the note and leaving it on the counter, Izuku grabbed the okonomiyaki and glass of water and walked over to the table. He sat down and quickly gave thanks and began to eat. With all that Inko had made it took Izuku 6 minutes to eat over. So when Izuku put his dish in the sink, he looked down at his phone and saw he only had a few minutes before school started. Izuku panicked, and grabbed his backpack from the living room, leaving his lunch behind. He bolted out of the door and down where his bike was waiting for him in the driveway. He hopped on his bike and rode his way out of the neighborhood and towards school. Izuku was so focused on getting to school, he didn't notice how far he was biking. Only slowly down and having a conscious thought as he pulled into his school's parking lot. Izuku pushed his bike into the bike rack and looked around. Confused by how he got to school so quickly, Izuku pulled out his phone and saw that he had beaten his record by over 3 minutes. Izuku had worked out over the summer, going on more jogs in the evening and doing workouts at home. Yet he hadn't done enough to get that much stronger, just some extra strength in his legs and some extra stamina. Moving his mind from that, Izuku leaned down to do his bike lock. As he twisted the channel locks, a backpack hit the back of his head. Izuku didn't even need to look up to know who it was. "Ha Deku, guess your quirk finally came in and it makes you unnoticeable, almost to the point of invisibility." Katsuki Bakugo laughed as he shouldered his backpack and walked towards the main building of Aldera Middle School. Izuku stood up and Bakugo must have perceived that as a threat, as he turned around and lit off from explosions in his hand. Izuku quickly turned away from Bakugo to finish locking his bike. Izuku then came face to face with Kei. "Hey, you said you would show your bite at school." Izuku had to take a step back as Kei did not have a sense of personal space. "I meant like during lunch. Class is about to start and I'd rather not be late on my first day," Izuku said, as he finished locking the bike. "Come on, just show me. This might be one of the coolest things to happen to either of us, so it's going to be a while until it's my turn," Kei said with a grin on his face. "Fine," Izuku said, then lifted his shirt and pulled back a bit of the bandage. Kei looked over the bite and smiled. "What do you think it was?" "A wolf of some kind. I hit a howl before it attacked me," Izuku said, reapplying the bandage and dropping his shirt. "That's impossible. The Japanese wolf went extinct over 100 years ago and no one in Mustafa has a wolf quirk," Kei said. "And you know how and why?" Izuku said, then remembered what Kei's quirk was. "Forget the how. I had a look at the quirk files of the city. No mention of a wolf quirk, the closest was a coyote, but they're way too small to make that kind of bite," Kei said, as he gained a smile. "Just the files of Mustafa, then what about the rest of Japan? Could be a villain from a neighboring city," Izuku said, as he and Kei began walking towards the front door. "Maybe, I'll have to take a look. I can do that during practice," Kei said. "Just don't get caught," Izuku said as he pushed the front door open and headed to the first PRD. "What about your inhaler, are you going to be good throughout the day?" Kei asked, before they split ways. "I'll grab my emergency one from my locker during lunch, I should be good until then," Izuku said, as it had always been customary for him to always have an emergency inhaler at school. Momo Yaoyorozu sat in the passenger side of her mother's car. She didn't sleep well last night as they had gotten into town late and after the eventful near crash she and her father experienced, her body took a while to get rid of all the adrenaline it had produced. She downed the last of her tea and then looked back at the front door to Aldera Middle School. Momo then looked over at her mom and asked, "Why did we have to move here? I like our old house." When she had first heard the news that her family would be moving out of their nice 10,000 feet square house into a modest 4,000 square foot house, she wasn't too pleased. While she would admit sometimes a house that size felt empty, it was big enough that she could easily hide from her parents when she needed to be alone with her thoughts. "Your father received word of a bizarre animal attack happening in the local area. For now we ask that you try to enjoy your time here," Momo's mother, Masako Yaoyorozu said, as she put the car in park then looked over at her daughter. It's probably just some villain with an animal quirk. Dad says our jobs as hunters became much harder when quirk appeared. Momo said, as she huffed and made no move to get out of the car. Yes, a thought that is shared among the group, but that is why we work as hard as we do. Heroes protect people from villains, it is our job to protect people from the supernatural. Speaking of heroes, our new house gives us a nice view of UA High School. Masako said, as she pointed out the window and over to a hill behind Aldera Middle School. Momo followed her mother's finger and her eyes flew upon UA High School. Its main building was resting on top of a hill, overlooking the city. The morning light gave it a holy glow from the sun reflecting out its polished exterior. Momo smiled, then questioned why her mother had pointed it out. But I thought, you and Dad. Momo began. We've been talking the last few nights and moving here, we knew it would become a bigger temptation. So we agreed we would allow you to try the entrance exam, and if you pass, we would allow you to study to become a pro hero. But honey, are you sure taking the task of fighting against villains and the supernatural is something you can handle? Masako questioned her daughter's decision. She had seen firsthand the stress that fighting the supernatural caused, many late nights and a strain on social life, judging that with the work of a pro hero it could easily run someone down into an early grave. Momo looked at her hand, as she created a small Russian nesting doll, then said, ever since I gained my quirk, you and Dad have called it a gift, a blessing. It's something that I would like to use to better the world. Sure, I can do that by being a hunter, but some public recognition as a pro hero can't hurt. Masako laughed and rubbed Momo's head. Hearing from others outside of your family that you're going good, it does feel nice to hear that every once in a while. So if you promise to behave at your new school, you'll be allowed to try out for UA. I promise, Mom. Momo said, as she slipped the Russian nesting doll into her backpack. I know, sweetie. Masako said, then leaned over and kissed Momo on the head. Now good, don't want to be late on your first day. See you after school. Momo said, as she opened her door and got out of the car. She heard the warning bell, not giving her a chance to give any love to her mother. Momo quickly dashed to the front door of Aldera Middle School, pulling out her cell phone with her class schedule. Her first PRD was science and luckily was only a few classrooms away. Momo quickly ran to the room marked on her phone and opened the door, just as the bell rang. Right on time, Mississippi. The teacher said, turning to look at Momo. Not recognizing her, the teacher became confused, but remembered Aldera was getting a new student. He looked down at his attendance list and found a new name, Miss Yayorozu. Yes, sir. Momo Yayorozu. Momo said, with a bow. Why don't you introduce yourselves to the class? The teacher said. Momo turned to face the class and said, hello, my name is Momo Yayorozu, I'm happy to be joining you in class today. Well, we have an open seat in the... The teacher paused as he looked in the back and saw that the seat he was going to refer to was next to izukumidoriya. We can have you work in a trio for today. Momo followed the teacher's gaze and saw it was landing on an empty seat next to a green student that had his head down and appeared to already be taking notes. However, there was nothing on the board and class had started. I see the empty seat. Several of the students snickered, confusing Momo of why her choice was so funny. I can have a different student move back there, you can be up in the front, the teacher said, confusing Momo even further. Momo also noticed all the students froze as if they didn't want to be the one that had to be moved to the back. I'm fine working in the back. No one else has to move. Momo said. Then, as if to accept all this and actually look a bit sorrowful for Momo, the teacher resigned and allowed Momo to walk to the back. As Momo walked to her seat, she noticed most of the students' eyes on her. She also noticed some looked back at the green-haired student, then back to her with hate in their eyes. Had she accidentally been paired with the extremely popular guy that all the girls wanted to date and all the boys wanted to be? He didn't seem to be paying attention that much. Was he extremely smart, or did he have an extremely powerful quirk? As Momo sat down, she slipped off her backpack and pulled out her notebook, then placed her backpack under the table. The teacher began reading off the attendance sheet, with each student replying with a variance of, here, however, when he reached the name of izukumidoriya, no one answered. Momo noticed the teacher looking at the student next to her, making the connection the green-hair silent student next to her was Izukumidoriya. Hello Midoriya, I'm Momo Yaoyorozu. Momo said. Her parents had made the deal if she behaved so could try out for UA, making new friends would make that easier to do. However, Izuku didn't say anything, he just continued to write in his notebook. Momo knew she shouldn't, but she watched Izuku and saw that he wasn't writing science notes, nor was he writing it in a notebook. It appeared to be a journal of something kind and he appeared to be working on some kind of stretch. It was hard to tell what it was, as Izuku's hand was covering it, but when he flipped his pencil around to erase a mistake, Momo saw it was an extremely detailed sketch of the new pro-hero mountain lady. Despite only being drawn with lead, Izuku's drawing appeared to be so lifelike. So much so Momo questioned whether Izuku's quirk dealt with his drawings. As if he could create something by drawing it, as she could create material by using the lipids in her body. If that was true, that would support her theory of being paired with the popular kid. As class went on, the teacher began to review the last lessons before summer break. He would write them on the board then call on different students. Many struggled getting them correct and had to make a few corrections on their equations. Eventually he called on Izuku. Maybe to use him as an example of how to correctly answer a question. Momo watched as Izuku took a small look at the science equations and on the board and said, comes out to 6 monocarbon dioxide and 3 sodium chlorides and 6 silicon dioxide. Momo was extremely impressed that he was able to solve it despite only having a maximum of 4 seconds before he solved the equation. However, the teacher called out, incorrect. Momo was confused and redid the math in her head and Izuku's answer was correct. Katsuki Bakugo, how about you? The teacher called on an ash blonde student in the second row. 6 monocarbon dioxides, 3 sodium chlorides and 6 silicon dioxides. The student said, saying the exact same answer as Izuku. Correct. The teacher said. Momo was taken back. The ash blonde student had said the same answer as Izuku, but Izuku was called wrong. Sir. Momo said, beginning to stand up. However, she suddenly felt a hand grip her arm. She looked down and saw Izuku trembling in his chair. His pencil, now broken, was discarded on the table. Izuku's stare bore holes through the table, as he was looking down at the ground, and though he was gripping Momo's arm, his touch was gentle and soft. A single word came from his mouth, don't. Momo was confused, of why was the first word he spoke to her. He hadn't stood up for himself when his answer was called incorrect, or when a different student stole his answer and was told it was correct. Then Momo noticed new things about Izukumidoriya. His breath was shallow, there were dark rings under his eyes and it seemed that he wanted to be anywhere else besides in class. Yet he was still sitting in his chair and being quiet. He didn't appear to be the type of bad boy that skipped class. He didn't want to skip class because of seeming cool, no, he wanted to be something else because of fear. Then Izuku spoke again, don't, not for me, it's not worth it. His voice was soft and quiet, allowing only Momo to hear it. Yes, Yaoyorozu, is there something you wanted to say? The teacher said, looking up from his book. Momo looked at the teacher then back down at Izuku. He had released her and was staring even more intently at his journal. She took a breath then said, never mind sir, I didn't mean to interrupt class. Understood, just don't let it happen again. Momo sat back down and saw Izuku had grabbed his broken pencil and gone back to his sketch of Mount Lady. You gave the right answer, the teacher was wrong. Why didn't you stand up for yourself when the other student gave the same answer, he's a thief. Why did you stop me from helping, Momo whispered, as she noticed that Izuku now looked miserable. It was a few moments before Izuku answered and all he said was a quiet, I know. Izuku couldn't believe his luck when the new girl sat down next to him. The teacher had tried to sit her in a trio, not to make Izuku feel bad, but to save the girl from the embarrassment of being next to him. But she was so innocent and didn't take the hint and sat down next to him. Izuku tried to distract himself by working on his hero analysis journal number 15, sketch of Mount Lady, but then the teacher just had to call him. Before he even looked up at the board, he knew that no matter what answer he gave, even if it was right, it would be called incorrect. He had hoped to give a wrong answer so Momo didn't suspect anything, but his mouth didn't obey his mind, and as soon as he solved the equation he gave the right answer. It didn't help that the teacher immediately called on Bakugo and he gave the same answer. Then Momo just had to stand up and fight for him. If Momo asked too many questions, then Izuku's secret would come out and Momo would be made fun of for standing up for a quirkless loser. Izuku had to save her from that, but as she called out to the teacher, Izuku's breath became shallow. He could feel his asthma kicking in from the stress. Izuku couldn't believe his luck, but that would for the best as it would draw Momo's attention away from her coming question. But that won't stop her asking that question later now. Izuku needs to stop her now. He summoned his fleeting strength, breaking his pencil in the process, and grabbed Momo's arm. She noticed and Izuku could feel her looking down at him. Don't. Izuku could feel Momo looking at him, questioning his action. He flinched as he was used to receiving verbal lashes when people looked at him. Yet he had to stop her. Don't, not for me, it's not worth it. His voice was soft and quiet out of fear. Yes, Yaoyorozu, is there something you wanted to say? The teacher said, looking up from his book. Izuku could feel his heart beating inside his chest and throat closing up. He released Momo and waited for everything to be revealed, but then he heard Momo take a breath and said, "Never mind, sir, I didn't mean to interrupt class." Understood, just don't let it happen again. As Momo said down, Izuku could feel his body relax and he was able to get a deep breath in. Then she had to ask, "You gave the right answer, the teacher was wrong. Why didn't you stand up for yourself when the other student gave the same answer? He's a thief." "Why did you stop me from helping?" Momo whispered, as she noticed that Izuku now looked miserable. Izuku could feel his body wanting to curl up, but he forced himself to answer at least her first question. However, all he could say was, "I know." Luckily Momo was quiet for the rest of class and didn't talk to Izuku. Something Izuku was thankful for, though he was quite stressed and struggled to breath. But he didn't want to make Momo suffer for being seated next to him, so Izuku controlled his breath as much as he could. He could have easily asked the teacher to go to his locker, but the same social anxiety that made him want to do, was also keeping him in his seat. He couldn't move, all he could do was half pay attention to the lesson coming from the teacher and half on his broken pencil that had rolled into the middle of his hero analysis for the future journal. Mount Lady was staring up at him with her bright eyes and her hands high above her head giving a big wave. Izuku's mind became focused on his drawing of Mount Lady, then an ear-piercing sound entered his ear. He flinched, pushing his chair away a bit from the table, as if he was going to stand. Momo looked over at him, but then the teacher called her name. The noise entered Izuku's ears again, this time more clear. It sounded like a phone ringing, then suddenly the line was picked up. "Good morning, Mr. Yaoyorozu." It was the voice of the principal. Yet that should be impossible as the principal's office was on the other side of the building, yet it sounded as if he was standing right next to Izuku's. Izuku heard static and could make out a few words, "safe and sound." "Yes, your wife dropped your daughter out a few minutes before class started. Science is her first PRD and it's filled with our brightest students." The principal hesitated a bit at the end and Izuku could hear his heart rate increase. "You'll be in town tonight, then I'll look forward to meeting with you tomorrow morning." Then the bell rang, shooting pain through Izuku's ear. Izuku looked up at the clock on the wall and saw that the first PRD was already over. Izuku quickly gathered all of his material and headed to his locker to grab his inhaler. Izuku was the first one out of the room, keeping his head down as he walked to the front and walked past his science teacher. As he walked his breath got caught in his throat, making him increase his pace to his locker. It soon came into view and he ran the last few steps, quickly turning the locker and throwing the door open. Izuku grabbed his inhaler and shook it then held it up to his lip. He pressed down on it and the air stuck in his throat was shoved out of the way, allowing him to take a deep breath. As Izuku relaxed his body, then voices entered his ear again. Voices of all the students and teachers at Aldera Middle School, then one caught his interest. "I'm sorry we had to put you in the back with him. The principal wanted you to give you the best experience here." It was the voice of the science teacher. "It's quite alright, right? I'm usually in the back since my last name is at the end of the alphabet," Momo said, as she slipped her pencil into her backpack and stood there. She noticed the teacher stopping himself from saying something. "It's nice that you see it that way, but I'll rearrange the student to have you not by the boy," the teacher said as his heart rate increased. "Is there something wrong with him? He didn't seem that much of a troublemaker," Momo said, as she began walking towards the door to go to her next class. No, he's one of the less popular kids and new students are associated with those they sit next to," the teacher lied. "Well, I don't mind, I thought he was a kind person," Momo said, then opened the door. She looked out into the hallway and saw students walking through them. She took a breath, then closed the door. She then turned to the teacher and asked, "Is that why you said his answer to the equation on the board was wrong?" "Excuse me, miss. I don't know what you're referring to," the teacher asks, trying to play dumb. 6 monocarbon dioxides, 3 sodium chlorides and 6 silicon dioxides. That was the answer to one of the equations you had on the board for review. You called on Midoriya, and he gave that answer, but you told him he was incorrect. You must be. The teacher began. Then you called on a different student and he gave the same answer, but he was told he was correct, Momo said. She didn't know why she was standing up for a boy she had barely met an hour ago, but she knew how it felt to be stereotyped. She had always had a mature body and her male classmates always thought they could trick her into letting them have a feel or something else inappropriate. This was different, but it was still mental manipulation. You must have heard him incorrectly. He said, 7 monocarbon dioxides. The teacher said as he leaned across his table. Momo trusted her memory enough to know Izuku had said 6 monocarbon dioxides. Miss Yaoyorozu, believe me when I say Izuku Midoriya is a student you don't want to be associated with. He may act away, but he, in all views, is a troublemaker, the teacher said. Momo didn't believe a single word that came out of her teacher's mouth, but said nothing of it. She just nodded and left the room and headed to her next class, but first she had to put her science textbook in her locker. She walked to her locker and turned the dial to input the communication, and once the door opened she began to put her textbook in it. So I heard that you're from Aichi. A prideful voice came from behind her locker door. Momo closed her locker door and came face to face with the ash-blonde kid that had part of her conversation with the teacher. Katsuki Bakugou, if she remembered correctly. However, she didn't allow her disgust to show through. Yes, that right. Well then the question is what brings a hot girl like you all the way here to Musafatu? Kago said, leaning up against the locker next to her. Surely it can't be the town or the people, you should have stayed in Aichi. Momo could tell Bakugou was trying to flirt, and failing miserably. Actually, it's my dad's work. He's an arms dealer that helps get firearms to local law enforcement. That usually scared the boys off, especially those that were more after her body. Yet Momo saw it in Bakugou's eyes. That comment just gave him more interest. Then how about you come over to the party on Friday? The local team is coming over after scrimmage, Bakugo said with a smile appearing on his face. Scrimmage? Momo asked, as she was unfamiliar with sports. Lacrosse is the local sport. My team has won the state championship the last 2 years. We actually have practice after school if you want to see how the next #1 hero fights, Kago said. Momo wanted to roll her eyes. She couldn't believe how full of himself Bakugo was. However, she managed to stop herself and said, Fridays are usually family night, but I'll see if I have time. Momo then turned and walked away. Kei and Izuku could only watch from their lockers, How is it the new girl has been here for only a PRD and she's alright being invited to practice and to the party on Friday? We're a part of the team and only just heard about the party. Have you ever known Kaken to not be confident in himself? Yaoyorozu is appealing and Kaken is just letting everyone know she's off the market. Izuku said, then took a hit from his inhaler. Come on, we have the rest of the day to get through. Izuku closed his locker and walked off to second PRD. The rest of the day was normal, no one besides Kei talked to him. He ate lunch by himself, he wasn't called on in class and he never saw Momo again. When the final bell of school rang, Izuku gathered all his materials and headed out to his bike. Where he found it to have a flat tire, from a pen that was still sticking out of the tire. Izuku sighed and pulled out the pen and walked his bike to the field that was 2 blockers away. He was one of the first to arrive, so he pulled out his uniform and padded and headed over to the bathrooms to change. By time he had changed, Coach arrived and was getting the supplies out of his trunk. Hey Coach. Izuku called out, walking over to the car. Hey Midoriya. Coach Yuto said. While he was the coach for the local lacrosse team, he was also the economic teacher for Aldera Middle. He was the only teacher that really acknowledged Izuku, and was fair to him, but he kind of treated all the students like that. He never played favorites, act as if he couldn't care less for his student. Anything I can help with? Izuku asked, looking for something to get his mind off from the day. Yeah, you can put these on. Coach Yuto pulled out a goalie stick and tossed it to Izuku. Izuku looked them over and began distraught, he was hoping to be a midfielder. As that was the position he had tried out for. I thought I had made the first line, why am I the goalie, that's not my position. Izuku asked. You do today, got to let some shot through, first day thing. Get damn energized, all fired up. Coach Yuto said, as he carried a bag of lacrosse ball over to the benches. Sir, what about me? Izuku said, as he looked at the gloves over again. Try not to take any to the face. Coach Yuto said. Izuku sighed as walked over to the benches to swch into his lacrosse shoes. As he sat, Kei arrived and sat next to him. Midoriya, if you play, then who am I going to have to sit next to? You aren't going to do that to your best friend, right? Kei said, as he wasn't even wearing knee pads or the correct shoes. This is my only way of not being on the sidelines, I have to take it. Izuku said, as he slipped on the goalie gloves and wrapped them tight. He then stood up and walked to the goal. As he walked he noticed some of the friends of the team had arrived and were waiting to watch practice. Izuku noticed Momo among those from Aldera. Izuku sighed as he never had a shot with her, despite her trying to stand up for him. Izuku knew as soon as she learned his secret, then he would just be forgotten again. Izuku saw Momo lean over to another student and heard her ask, who is the goalie? Oh, that's Midoriya. He gets into trouble, starting fights with other students. Though kind of pointless. The student said. Why? Izuku heard Momo ask, but then Coach Yuto blew his whistle. Izuku almost fell to the ground, from how loud it was. Since when had Coach Yuto been able to blow a whistle that loud? Izuku cleared the ringing in his ears, then Coach Yuto then said, we'll start with free shots then to blocked shots. Izuku sighed, free shots mean that it would just be him and the person taking the shots. All the players lined up 11 meters from the goals in the center of the field. Afterwards Coach Yuto provided them each with a lacrosse ball. In turn you walk and place your ball and have 15 seconds to decide on your choice of action. Once you hear my whistle, you have 5 seconds to take your shot. Understood? Yes, coach. All the players yelled. Coach Yuto blew his whistle and the first player stepped forwards and placed the ball in their lacrosse stick. Izuku was still trying to get the ringing out of his ear, so when the first player took their shot, it went directly into Izuku's chest. Izuku flew to the ground and had the wind knocked out of him. He could hear everyone laughing and Coach Yuto yelling, Midoriya, get your head out of the ground. Izuku shook his head, his ears clearing and took a deep breath. He grabbed the lacrosse ball and put it in his stick. he threw it back to the player, then got ready. He looked at his next opponent, trying to read his mind to see which way he would kick the ball. Coach Yuto suddenly blew his whistle and the lacrosse ball came flying towards him. Izuku's entire body flexed and he moved his stick to the left. The lacrosse ball came screaming directly to his stick and he got it. Izuku took a knee from how fast he moved so as not to twist an ankle. His mind caught up with the world and he looked down to see the ball in his next. As he stood up, he saw that everyone was shocked and surprised, but none more than Izuku himself. He had never had fast reflexes before, yet he had been able to track a lacrosse ball flying at him. He heard Kei cheering for him, giving Izuku a small smirk. He judged the lacrosse ball a bit then and threw it back to his teammates. Coach Yuto blew his whistle, signaling the next kicker to step forwards and place their ball. 15 seconds later, the ball came flying towards Izuku. Izuku saw it curving to the right and up, they were trying to put it in the corner. Izuku sidestepped and brought his stick up, this time only managing to knock the ball off course enough for it to hit the side beam and for it to go out of bounds. Izuku caught his breath and got his feet back under him before hit the ground, as a smile appeared on his face. He had trained over the summer, but his reflexes shouldn't have improved that much. But clearly they had and Izuku wasn't complaining. He looked very and saw the whistle slip out of Coach Yuto's lips. Izuku just shrugged and moved back to his starting the next 15 minutes, Izuku was managing to catch or deflect all the lacrosse ball that came flying. No matter how fast they were or where they were flying to. After catching another one, Izuku noticed Bakugo stepped out of the line and walked up to the front. He shouldered their teammates out of the way and placed his lacrosse ball in his stick's net, yet no one complained, some even took a step back. Izuku locked eyes with Bakugo and Bakugo gave a small growl. He couldn't believe it when Longhair thought about standing up for Deku, that's why he had invited her to practice and the party, just so she could see how useless Deku was without any quirk. "Come on, Deku, let's see what you got," Bakugo said, then Coach Yuto blew his whistle. The world around Izuku slowed down, everyone was moving in slow motion. He could see Bakugo's eyes flicker to the right, but it was faint. His hands were posed to throw the ball left, Izuku took a small step back then swung his stick to the left, just as Bakugo took a small step forward and chuckled the ball. Izuku looked forward and saw the ball coming towards his face. Izuku panicked and his hands began to move to catch the ball. Izuku closed his eyes, waiting for the impact. However, it never came. He listened for the sound of the lacrosse ball hitting the net behind him but it never did. Izuku finally opened his eyes and saw he had caught the ball within his goalie net. Izuku confusedly tossed the ball into the air and caught it with his hand. Izuku then held the ball up like a trophy to show that he had caught it. The crowd cheered and Kei yelled out, "That's my friend." Izuku looked over at Coach Yuto who had an impressed look on his face. Izuku then looked over Bakugo, who was snarling. Izuku smirked, and tossed the ball back to Bakugo. Bakugo caught the ball with his own hand, and Izuku could see smoke coming out from under it. Bakugo growled as he turned away from Izuku and walked off the field. Izuku quickly turned to face his next opponent. After blocked kicks, where Kei was put as defender, though he wasn't really good at it, Izuku was called off the field to talk to Coach Yuto. "Midoriya, due to your unique position." Izuku had a feeling Coach wasn't talking about being a goalie, "There's a specific question I have to ask. I know you trained over the summer since you made first line, but you couldn't get that good that quickly. So I have to ask, are you taking enhancing DRGs? You mean steroids?" Izuku asked, and Coach nodded, "No, my mother would kill me and curse my grave. Still, when the first game comes, you might be forced to if you want to stay on the team," Coach Yuto said. Izuku couldn't believe his ears, he got good, but because he didn't have a quirk people were going to assume it was DRGs. All because quirkless people couldn't be good at anything. Izuku huffed and looked at Coach Yuto, he knew it wasn't Coach's fault. "May I ask to leave, sir?" Coach Yuto nodded and said, "Yes." Izuku pulled out of his gloves and walked to his bike. He grabbed his backpack and began walking home. Things had changed, that much was obvious, but it couldn't be from anything he had done. He wasn't that prideful to assume all the training he had made him good enough to block each shot, even pros let one or two slip through. All the changes had happened all of sudden, but the only thing out of the ordinary for Isuku was he and Kei's visit to the forest. That must have been the cause of this, more specifically whatever attacked him. Isuku needed to figure out what really happened in the forest. Once Isuku got home, he changed out of his lacrosse uniform, threw his backpack on his bed and quickly got changed into a regular pair of clothes. Isuku made a quick bite to eat, then headed out for the forest. With bikes, last time it had only taken 30 minutes, but this time it took Isuku nearly an hour and a half to get to the forest. With it being Monday, the park was empty, so Isuku headed to the hiking path. He walked around a tree, then Kei suddenly asked, "So coach asked if you were on steroids?" Not even surprised by his friend's sudden appearance, Isuku looked up and said, "Yeah, how did you figure it out?" "Let's see, you're not exactly the best player, yet somehow you managed to block, deflect or grab over 50 lacrosse ball without letting one into the goal," Kei said, swinging his legs back and forwards from the branch he was sitting on. "Don't forget I'm quirkless, so that makes me more suspicious." Isuku growled a bit. Why did the world have to be so quirkist? Sure, he did have amazing powers, but at the end of the day everyone was still human. "You know that's not how I see you," Kei said, jumping down from the tree. "It is for the rest of the world," Isuku said, kicking a rock. It bounced off the ground a few times, but then disappeared down a small hill. "We're not talking about the rest of the world, we're talking about you," Kei said, putting a hand on his friend's shoulder. He could see the stress in Izuku's mind and he wanted to help. Isuku took a deep breath then said, "I can't really explain it, except for, time slowed down. Like I had all the time in the world to catch the ball, but that's not the only weird thing. We're both weird, so you're going to have to explain it further," Kei said, as he followed Izuku. "I can hear stuff I shouldn't be able to hear. I can smell things that I haven't been able to before," Izuku said, as he jumped across a small creek. "Smell things, really?" Kei said in a sarcastic tone, that made him sound like he couldn't believe that Izuku would feel the need to point that out. "Yeah, like I can smell things. Like that mint gum in your pocket," Izuku said, turning around and looking at Kei. Having smelt the gum since before he spotted Kei. Kei laughed and reached into his pocket. "I don't have any." Kei stopped as he pulled out a stick of gum. "Oh cool, I thought I had lost this one." Kei unwrapped it and threw the gum into his mouth. "So you think all this started with the bite?" "It's the only logical reason. I can't suddenly gain a quirk at this age, it's unheard of, and if I didn't my body won't be adjusted to it. That's why we gain quirks when we're kids, so our body can grow to handle whatever quirk we get. So what if it's like an infection, my body is producing a lot of adrenaline before my body goes into shock," Izuku said, having studied for medicine before he started volunteering at the animal shelter. "You know what? I think you might actually be right. In fact, I've eventually heard something like this before. It's a specific kind of infection," Kei said, as he shoved the wrapper into his pocket. "Really?" Izuku asked. "Yeah, it was called lycanthropy," Kei said, with an extremely serious tone, but a dumb look on his face. "What's that? It sounds bad," Izuku said, becoming extremely concerned for his health. "Oh yeah, it's the worst. The case studies of it weren't pretty, but luckily it only happens once a month," Kei said, keeping his serious tone of voice, while trying not to laugh at how dumb Izuku could be sometimes. "Once a month, that still doesn't sound good," Izuku said, as he began to look for his inhaler. He could feel his anxiety rising, and the middle of the woods was the last place he wanted to have an asthma attack. "Yeah, on the night of the full moon," Kei said, then let out a small wolf howl. Izuku paused as he processed what Kei just said, then Kei started to laugh. "You're a JRK, you know that right?" Izuku pushed Kei away. I know it's a gift and a curse. Besides, you're the one who heard a wolf howling. Kei said. I said I thought I heard a wolf howling. And there could be something seriously wrong with me. Izuku said. I know. You're a werewolf. Kei said, growling like an animal. The supernatural doesn't exist. Izuku said. Of all the crazy ideas Kei had had, one probably took the cake. Sure, quirks were a thing, but there was still a limit to how crazy a world could get. I'm obviously kidding, but works do. Come on, think about it. Quirks have been around for a long time. What do you think are the chances of one appearing that could turn people into werewolves? Kei said. Then I'm sure it would be written something in history, and until I read it, the supernatural simply does not exist. Izuku said. Okay, but if you see me in science class trying to melting all the silver I can find, don't blame me. Kei said. Why? Izuku confused by that, as Kei wasn't that cautious as a person and rarely planned ahead. 'Cause Friday's a full moon. Kei said. Izuku suddenly stopped. He looked around and realized where he was, had he instinctively walked back. Here. Yet he wasn't even thinking about it, he hadn't thought about the dead girl all day. This is where it was? What? Kei said, looking around, then crouched down to look at the ground. Nothing is here. The other half of the girl. This is where I was attacked, then found the girl. Izuku crouched down and moved some leaves, his broken bat was revealed. I dropped my inhaler and found the body when I was looking for it. Kei slapped his leg as he stood up, maybe the killer moved the body. Then he took a step back. Well, if he did, he better have left my inhaler, those things are really expensive. Izuku said, as he grabbed his broken bat. Hey Midoriya. Kei said, as he took another step back. Izuku stood up facing Kei and asked, what? Kei made a gesture for Izuku to turn around. Izuku turned around and saw a man that appeared to be in his early 20s, wearing all black, walking up to them. What are you doing here? The man asked. Kei and Izuku looked at each other. Kei was the best at lying, but he couldn't think of anything, and that did not give Izuku much hope. This is private property. The man said, as he stopped walking and looked between Kei and Izuku, before settling on Izuku. No, this is a part of the park. Kei said. The edge of the hiking trails ended, 50 yards in that direction. Notice the stone wall. The man said, pointing behind Izuku and Kei. Izuku and Kei looked behind them and noticed an old stone wall that looked like it had been around for a long time. It was falling apart and moss and grass were growing all over it. You need to replace that thing. Kei said. Shut up. Izuku said through clenched teeth, then turned back to the man, sorry, we didn't know. We're just looking for something, but... The man made a gesture for Izuku to continue. We'll just forget about it. Izuku said. The man then pulled his hand out of his pocket and tossed Izuku something. Izuku caught and found it to be his inhaler. Izuku looked up to thank the man, but he had already turned around and walked away. Come on. I'm supposed to be at the vet volunteering. However, Kei stopped Izuku and said, dude, that was Kurium Takeo. He's only a few years older than us. His family was really rich and had a lot of history with Musafatu, especially in the Quirk Revolution Wars. Was? Izuku said. They were killed. What, 10 years ago? Their house burned down and they were trapped inside. It took days for the police and heroes to search through the remains to find the bodies. Kei said as if he was telling a story. Wonder what he's doing back in town. Izuku said, then hit Kei across the chest, come on, I need to get to the animal clinic and you need to get home. Together they walked to the park, where Kei got on his bike and bid his friend farewell. While Kei went south, Izuku headed north. Izuku walked alongside the road until he hit the main city, then head east until he arrived at Dr. Asa's animal clinic. He walked around to the back door and pulled out from his back pocket and unlocked the door. He walked in and said, "Dr. Asa, I'm here." "Yeah, Midoriya, happy to see you're serious about working here," Dr. Asa said, coming around the corner. He was a shorter older gentleman, and had little twigs with leaves around his body. There wasn't much he could do with the twigs, not that they ever got in his way. You seemed excited to have this opportunity. "Well, there weren't many that were willing to hire me," Izuku said, as he grabbed a bag of cat feed and hauled it over his shoulder. Izuku knew he should have felt some bite in his abdomen, but he didn't. However, that did remind him of something. "Hey Doc, would you be able to identify an animal bite for me? Is this for a school paper of some kind?" Dr. Asa said as he walked past Izuku to put a bottle of medicine back into a locker drawer. Not exactly. It's more personal in nature," Izuku said, as he set the cat food next to all the bowls that were used to feed the cats. Dr. Asa locked the drawer, then turned around. "Alright, let's see the photo." "It's not exactly a photo," Izuku said, as he began to feel up his shirt. Dr. Asa saw the bandage and immediately ran over. "You were attacked." "When?" Dr. Asa said, holding a hand close to Izuku's side but not touching it. His hand waved as if he was going to be attacked from the bandage. "Yesterday evening. I haven't felt that much pain, even during lacrosse practice," Izuku said, then began to peel back the bandage. "It's weird, but after I was bitten, I heard a wolf howl, but there haven't been wolves in Japan for some time." "Well, I'll see if I can identify the animal by the bite mark," Dr. Asa said. Izuku nodded and pulled back the bandage. However, the injury on this side was missing. The skin was a little raw, but there was no scarring or any sign that there had been an injury in the first place. "Well, all I see is the side of my assistant." Izuku paused for a second, then pulled the bandage off the rest of the way and dropped his shirt. "I swear, I was attacked by some kind of large animal." Dr. Asa stepped around, mumbling something that Izuku didn't understand. "Well, it could have been a recalled dream that you see so clearly that you think of it being a memory." "No, it wasn't a dream. I even showed it to my friend K," Izuku said, as he balled up the bandage, still trying to process that he didn't need any more. "Well, you don't have a regeneration quirk, so that's out of the question too. And besides those theories, there is nothing else to explain your mysterious injury," Dr. Asa said, sat down on a stool. For a moment a sense of dread appeared on his face. This sense of dread was masked with a smile, as he says, "For tonight, I'm going to leave a checklist of stuff to do before locking up. Think you can handle it? It's only my second day," Izuku said, still trying to not focus on his vanishing wound and failing. He didn't have a quirk, and regeneration quirk were rare, and he didn't know anyone that had one. So how had his side healed so quickly? "And you learned a lot on your first day. I'm sure you'll be fine. Mainly it is making sure the animals are fed and the locks are secure. Shouldn't be too hard for you, you're a quick learner, Midoriya," Dr. Asa said as he stood up from his stool to make the list. "Are you sure, Doc?" Izuku said, as he walked over to Dr. Asa. "The worst you can do is burn the place down. Maybe then I'll have an excuse to finally retire." Dr. Asa joked. He noticed the stress on Izuku's face. "You'll be fine." Izuku didn't believe in Dr. Asa's confidence in himself. Dr. Asa wrote the list, then handed it to Izuku. "There's some more complex and dangerous stuff that I'll handle before heading out, but everything on that list is what you would normally do if you owned a pet." Izuku looked down at the list and saw the truth in Dr. Asa's words. He had never owned a pet, but the list was full of stuff that seemed normal to do. First on the list was sweeping and vacuuming the front lobby. No one was currently in it, so it seemed the perfect time to do it. Izuku headed out to the front and cleaned the front lobby. By the time he was done with it, Dr. Asa called out that he would be leaving. Izuku acknowledged him, then set out on completing the rest of the list. Last on the list was feeding the dogs and cats. As Izuku began feeding the dogs, a storm rolled in again, similar to the night before. but it was still in the distance. Izuku quickly fed the dogs, then began on the cats. However, the moment Izuku walked in to feed the cats, they began hissing and crying loudly. Izuku figured it was the storm, but hadn't reached the clinic yet. Then suddenly the cat's cry went straight through Izuku's ear. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author D3 Miles art on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.